As of 2021, India's urban/rural population ratio is 35 to 65. Many women in villages live in acute poverty, depravity, and illiteracy. There are cases of young women being lured by men with the promise of marriage and better life to meet them outside their homes and have sex. Unbeknownst to the women, the entire act is recorded and distributed as clips on WhatsApp and eventually uploaded on porn websites. When women don't oblige, the jilted lovers gather more men and gang rape the women, holding a knife to her throat and filming the entire act. There was a case of a 17-year-old girl who was raped for an entire year because her rapist threatened to leak the said video if she didn't oblige. She was innocent in believing that the video would remain private as long as she kept having intercourse with them. Her rapist was selling her clips for 50 rupees, less than $1. If the rapes are violent, those videos get sold for a lot higher. These women spend their whole life not knowing that compromised videos of them are being watched by people on the internet. Such videos come under the category of homemade or hidden, among others, in websites like Pornhub. Although unconstitutional, India still practices the caste system, a stratified social hierarchy that deems people from a caste termed Dalits to be untouchable. Women belonging to the said caste face extreme violence in the hands of men, especially in the form of rape. In the past year, India reported an average of 10 Dalit women were raped per day. On January 2018, Asifa, an 8-year-old girl from Kathua, a Muslim nomadic tribe, was brutally gang raped, murdered, and discarded. When the news and identity of the victim was released, Asifa rape and Kathua rape video became the most searched phrases on porn websites. The Pornhub 2019 year-end review says, begin quote, "It seems that people are looking for more realistic depictions of sex. Real people versus actors seem to be the draw. Sex has become so much less taboo that those who get a kick out of exhibitionism can do so with very little experience or equipment," end quote. The truth is, many of these real women and girls have been put out there by others who abuse them. Canada is among the top 5 Pornhub consumers, and it hosts MindGeek, a corporation that welcomes men's demand for filmed human rights violation. Pornhub's message is that abductions, rapes, torture of vulnerable women, especially in the global South countries, can be considered fun sex experience for men everywhere. But this is no longer a Canadian issue. This is a global issue. Thank you.
Les mouvements féministes se mobilisent partout pour que les survivantes des violences liées au système pornographique soient entendues. En France, en 2020, une enquête a été ouverte pour viol et proxénétisme contre la plateforme pornographique Jackie et Michel. Et nous, à Oser le féminisme, nous accompagnons une centaine de victimes de cette plateforme. 75 à 80% ont subi des violences sexuelles dans l'enfance et une grande partie sont d'origine migrante. Les vidéos de leurs viols sont associées à des mises en scène racistes. Les utilisateurs des plateformes pornographiques recherchent principalement des termes dégradants, discriminatoires, lesbophobes et racistes, ce qui renforce les systèmes d'oppression dans les sociétés. Les femmes victimes de l'industrie pornographique sont contraintes de subir des sodomies, double pénétration, viols collectifs, coups, gifles, suffocation, jets d'urine, éjaculation faciale en groupe et d'autres violences qui leur gardent de graves séquelles physiques et psychotraumatiques. Les témoignages que nous avons recueillis en France font écho, évidemment, aux violences subies par les femmes dans le monde entier. Donc, certains pays comme le Venezuela, la Roumanie, le Nigeria ou la Colombie sont des cibles privilégiées du trafic humain à des fins d'exploitation sexuelle. Les vidéos des viols collectifs sur les sites pornographiques sont monnaie courante. Plus ces viols sont violents, plus ils se vendent cher. La plupart des victimes n'ont pas les moyens de les faire retirer. Il existe une épidémie des violences sexuelles à travers le monde et la pornographie est l'école et la légitimation de ces violences. Donc, le Canada a une responsabilité dans sa diffusion puisqu'il abrite MindGeek sur son territoire, une entreprise criminelle qui est propriétaire des plus grands sites pornographiques gratuits au monde. Le Canada est membre du G7. Il est censé être un modèle pour la protection des filles et des femmes et il finance d'importants projets pour la lutte contre le trafic humain à l'étranger. Pourtant, ces règles ne sont pas appliquées dans les propres frontières du Canada. Vous faites partie du top 5 des pays avec le plus de trafic sur les sites pornographiques. Vous favorisez la demande pour la traite des filles et des femmes en permettant à MindGeek de normaliser les violences sexistes et sexuelles et cette incohérence doit cesser. Vous avez ratifié des conventions clés des Nations Unies pour la défense des droits des femmes, la protection des enfants, la lutte contre le trafic humain, la lutte contre la torture. Vous avez adopté le modèle nordique qui permet de lutter contre l'exploitation sexuelle. Et ces systèmes progressistes doivent être défendus contre les puissants lobbies proxénètes. La société civile, comme les gouvernements, doivent se mobiliser pour que les profits économiques de certains ne se fassent pas en sacrifiant les filles et les femmes les plus précarisées au monde. Les États-Unis, pays voisins, ont adopté en 2018 la loi Sesta Fosta qui rend les plateformes en ligne responsables en cas de diffusion de vidéos liées au trafic humain. C'est possible de faire la même chose. Le monde vous regarde. Vous avez des responsabilités vis-à-vis du droit international, vis-à-vis de vos propres lois, ainsi que de l'ensemble des filles et des femmes qui sont condamnées au silence et à la peur. Vous avez la responsabilité d'appliquer des standards de protection exigeants. L'incapacité à agir du gouvernement canadien pour prévenir, stopper et réparer les crimes commis par MindGeek représente une grave violation des droits humains protégés internationalement. Il est temps que ça cesse. Merci.
Kenny Mireya Finol was a 26-year-old Venezuelan woman who tried to escape the economic and political turmoil in her home country. An organized crime group in Mexico murdered and mutilated her. I'm speaking on behalf of Kenny and 16 other women who have been disappeared and are still missing and who were probably connected to the same organized crime group that murdered her, filmed their assault and torture, and then killed them and sold the videos to porn sites like Pornhub. The organized criminal group who ran the escort website, Zona Divas, procured their victims from Venezuela and Colombia to bring them into Mexico under the radar of Mexico's migration authorities, so they failed to record their existence within the borders of Mexico. After being transported to Mexico, the women's passports and all of their legal documents were confiscated. They lived under debt bondage. They were coerced as part of their trafficking debt repayment to permit themselves to be photographed by a pimp pornographer who is now in jail for trafficking in persons. Survivors testified that they resisted, cried, and begged not to be sexually humiliated while being filmed. They were drugged and coerced into smiling for the camera. The women's human rights were violated in the production of the gang's videos that were then sold and uploaded to websites like Pornhub. The gang threatened to send videos to the women's children, and they threatened to kill the women's relatives. In order to force the women's compliance, the mafia criminals lied to the women, promised them legal documents to work, and forced them to sign fake agreements with websites like Pornhub. These contracts were no more valid than confessions signed by prisoners of war. They are coerced by torture. Consent is now being discussed by the Canadian Parliament. Not only were these women's consents invalid because the women were tortured in order to obtain the consent, but when the crime of trafficking occurs, international law signed by Canada states that consent on behalf of the victim is irrelevant. The conduct that is under prosecution is that of the trafficker who abuses his position of power to exploit victims and gain profit. Canada must presume trafficking for the purpose of sexual exploitation when videos of unidentified women by unidentified uploaders of rapes and murders and the context of these filmed human rights violations have occurred in unknown circumstances. None of these women is able to enforce her human right to demand that Pornhub remove her videos. The voices of these 22 women have been silenced forever by MindGeek's Pornhub's marketing their rapes as sexual entertainment. Tragically, victims of film rape and torture don't even know that their brutal humiliation is being masturbated over every day on Pornhub. Canada has a responsibility to make MindGeek Pornhub stop facilitating and profiting from this exploitation. They owe the victims a debt of apology and repair.
In 2016, 5 men who called themselves La Manada, or the Wolf Pack, raped a young woman in Spain. One of them was a civil guard and another one was in the military. As often happens, the woman was further victimized by being blamed for her own gang rape.
The brutal case mobilized the Spanish feminist movement, but the film rape trended on Pornhub, Xvideos, Xhamster, and was the most searched for term on the web the weeks after the men were sentenced. In the 4 years prior to August 2020, we documented 211 gang rapes in Spain. One of them resulted in femicide, and 1 in 10 of these rapes are transformed into porn. They were photographed or filmed by the rapists. There is a horrible sameness between gang perpetrator sexual violence and these super popular videos, which are categorized as gangbang. In pornography, the male is the subject who has a sexual desire, and women and girls are the dehumanized, humiliated object. The most popular porn today sends the message that their objection, their resistance, and their no must not be respected. Men are taught by pornography like Pornhub that women's physical pain is sexually arousing. All kinds of violent and humiliating videos sold by Pornhub are promoted as sexually arousing for men. Men who engage in collective sexual violence are imitating pornography, which is a school of sexual violence that has established a global rape culture. In addition to these crimes, the women's videos are viewed, shared, and reproduced on Pornhub and other platforms with new titles. This reproduction of their abuse, humiliation, and rape is ongoing torture for any woman who is alive after these human rights violations. These gang rapes in Spain, Italy, India, and elsewhere are not isolated incidents. They are the result of pornography's normalization of systematic violence. We need to apply a human rights framework to the criminals who control and profit from the filmed gang rapes produced by porn pimps. Canada bears responsibility for its role in protecting the distribution of criminally produced pornography. And Canada should fund educational campaigns against objectification of women, against hypersexualization and stereotyped roles of women and girls, while at the same time promoting healthy relationships and sexuality based on equality, mutual desire, respect, and empathy. Thank you.
Young people in Nigeria now have relatively easy access to internet and smartphones, which also gives them easy access to pornography. The result of this is that the extremely few cases of rape in the past have now turned into an epidemic of sexual violence. This year, a 17-year-old boy raped a 5-year-old girl. Last year, 16 teen boys gang raped 8 girls who were younger than 12 years old. A group of high school students in Lagos gang raped their female classmates. In all of these cases, they were practicing what they learned in pornography, like that seen on Pornhub. I'm sure you know of similar cases in your countries. Today in Edo State in Nigeria, we're working to prosecute over 27 cases of rape, incest, and other sexual violence and sexual attacks on children. 27 is a frightening number, but it is the tip of the iceberg. COVID-19 has made women and girls particularly vulnerable because of their increased poverty. Online pimps and traffickers have used COVID to their advantage. There are very many Nigerian traffic victims in Italy and in other parts of Europe. Many of these women have been raped while under the control of pimps, and their rapes were filmed. Then these films are transmitted to porn sites like Pornhub and MindGeek via other social networks like WhatsApp. The women are usually not aware that they are being filmed. They cannot possibly consent to these films. Threats from traffickers that their filmed rapes will be shown to their family and friends keep them under the criminals' violent control. It also deepens their trauma and psychological stress. Many women have constant suicidal thoughts. This violently coerced production, distribution, and consumption of pornography are human rights violations. They are an abuse of power and of the vulnerability of women and girls from countries like Nigeria, where women and girls live under chronic socioeconomic injustice, armed conflicts, humanitarian emergencies, climate change crisis, among other causes. While MindGeek reaps billions of dollars in profits for Canada, women, boys, and especially girls are paying the cost with their lives. When girls become women, These human rights violations simply continue. When will these human rights violations stop? Canada must investigate MindGeek for gross human rights violations. If crimes are found to have occurred, MindGeek must set up a compensation for harms they have helped to perpetrate, including trauma-based rehabilitation and support of victims in Canada and in the Global South. Thank you.
In the US, we have a saying, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, often meaning that if you buy sex from women in Vegas, law enforcement ignores the crimes and you are given a pass. Well, it's clear that what happens in Canada doesn't stay in Canada. Canada is home to MindGeek, a multi-billion-dollar criminal enterprise that trades in the bodies of women and children, an owner of the world's largest free porn sites, including, of course, Pornhub. You've just heard from women in excruciating detail the grave human rights violations, including rape, gang rape, torture, trafficking, sexualized murders, and others wrought by MindGeek in India, France, Mexico, Spain, and Nigeria. And to this, we can add multiple other countries from the global south, as well as the global north. While MindGeek argues that they monitor content, the reality is very different. The well-oiled PR machine of MindGeek, bolstered by the lobbying arm of the porn industry, ironically named the Free Speech Coalition, works overtime to conceal and legitimize the illegal activities of MindGeek that span the porn industry value chain from production through to distribution. We know from survivors that Pornhub uploads videos of children being raped, many of whom are trafficked. We also know that reaching the age of 18 does not prevent women from being trafficked and having their rapes uploaded onto Pornhub. MindGeek hides behind the concept of consent. But as we just heard, consent is a meaningless concept when you are poor, hungry, trafficked, displaced, raped, held prisoner, and live in fear of your life. The production end of the value chain relies on these grotesque forms of coercion, often invisible to those who are fortunate enough never to know what such coercion looks like. MindGeek distributes these illegal videos across the globe, making life intolerable for women and girls in the videos, and for women and girls and boys everywhere who somehow have to survive in a world drenched in violent porn. Allowing MindGeek to continue to profit from women and children's oppression is now not simply ignorance, but a willful refusal on the part of the Canadian government to hold MindGeek accountable for its criminal activities. The massive scale and systemic nature of the crimes against women and girls worldwide classifies as gross human rights violations under international human rights laws. The individual and collective harm, including physical and mental injury, the emotional suffering, and the planned and sustained acts of violence by the perpetrators must be addressed by the Canadian government to prevent further acts of violence and to provide remedies to the victims. Anything less is a violation of women and children's human rights. We appeal to you, the Canadian government, to act against MindGeek and enforce your existing laws so that this international criminal enterprise is put on notice that the world will no longer tolerate their flagrant human rights violations. You in Canada are in an enviable position of being a beacon to the rest of the world to say women and children's lives matter. All women and children's lives matter. And then we can applaud you by the fact that what happens in Canada doesn't stay in Canada. Thank you. The thing about that separates MindGeek from any other porn company is it is basically the bones and the flesh of the porn industry. Unlike any other company, it controls not only production, houses not only consumption, distribution, also webmasters. You are never in the porn industry more than 2 degrees of separation away from MindGeek. This is why they are the center of the criminal activity of the porn industry. So why we need to look at other companies if we went after MindGeek to hold them responsible for the crimes that they are committing and that they are distributing, it would have a profound effect on the porn industry worldwide, because the infrastructure would be seriously compromised if we held MindGeek accountable. So it stands aside. It is the Amazon of the porn industry.
I'm Jane Sarson, and I live in Nova Scotia, Canada. And along with Linda McDonald and other Canadians, we have supported the women who are speaking today. And when we talk about Canada, I have to say I'm very disappointed in Canada and have been for a long time. The women today are talking about the torture that women and girls suffer. And if we are to respect women's voices, we are to hear what they're saying. And in 2012, Linda McDonald and I went to the UN Committee Against Torture in Geneva and complained that Canada does not acknowledge torture perpetrated by private individuals, which is the buyers of Pornhub videos, torture videos, etc. Canada at that time decided that even though the Committee Against Torture recommended that our national law should do something about torture by private individuals or non-state actors, Canada decided, the government of the time decided, that that was a soft law recommendation and they didn't have to pay any attention to it. So we're at this stage now, these many years later, doing the same talk around the torture of women and children by Pornhub, where people are making billions of dollars. So I want to thank NDP, and I want to thank you, Charlie, for at least hearing all of the women and the women in Canada that Lynn and I have spoken of who have been tortured for years and decades. Thank you very much.